Included. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for Medical Cannabis and Cancer. My name is Savina Chacheva, and I'm the program manager at the Cancer Wellness Center. For those of you new to the center, the Cancer Wellness Center is a nonprofit organization aimed to improve the physical and emotional well-being of those impacted by cancer and their families. We provide a variety of free programs and services, which include education programs like the one this evening, support services, wellness classes, and more. For more information, you can visit cancerwellness.org, and I will put that in the chat in a little bit. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Please note that your video and audio was disabled for the program. If you have any questions during Dr. Mendoza Temple's presentation, please type them in the Q&A box. After the program, you will receive our evaluation. We ask that you take a few minutes to provide your feedback. We appreciate it very much. And now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Leslie Mendoza Temple. To date, Dr. Temple has certified over 500 patients for medical cannabis in her practice since Illinois opened its patient program in 2015. She also served as the chair of the Medical Cannabis Advisory Board for the Illinois Department of Public Health, influencing state and hospital policy with respect to this controversial medicinal and recreational plant. Dr. Temple is the medical director of NorthShore's Integrative Medicine program in Glenview. And we're really excited to have her here this evening. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Dr. Temple.
Thank you for having me. I always love presenting for the Cancer Wellness Center, near and dear to my heart. So without further ado, I think, do you see my screen yet? I haven't shared it. Let me share my screen. I forgot to push the button. Here we go. Okay, and this will be recorded, and there are slides that are in PDF form that will be available. So don't worry about scribbling everything down. Just enjoy and listen. Write your questions in the chat. I'll address as many questions as I can, particularly the ones that would serve the most people. And I try to go as quickly through those questions as I can. So there's nothing like belaboring one person's question for 30 minutes and then no one gets a chance to ask. I'm very familiar with that feeling. So I have no disclosures, no relationship with industry. So that's an important thing to note. The objectives here are to talk about how we manage pain and help improve sleep and appetite. So from a symptom-based, cannabis can really cover a lot of those issues. But what about treating cancer itself? And I get lots of questions about that. So I'll touch base on what evidence is available on this. When I first learned about cannabis, I got a visceral, and I still do, a visceral reaction to the way I was raised, that it's for the bad kids and, the people by the smokestack. You don't hang out with those miscreants, and you just say no, etc. And then as time went on, you also see people on lots of pharmaceuticals. I mean, you start to think there's got to be something to this. So back in 2013, when the Illinois medical cannabis law came about, I had nothing to do with it. It just read it on a news feed, and I thought I better learn about this because I think this is going to be big. And with that in mind, I charged myself with reading about it because there is no education on cannabis in medical school or residency except for cannabis as a substance of abuse. So we know plenty about what happens when a person overdoses on marijuana or cannabis, what happens with addiction and driving. We've got plenty of information on that, but information on cannabis as a therapeutic medicinal substance is sorely lacking, even though it's been used for thousands of years by humans for various purposes. So why does cannabis do anything to us? And it's because we have our own endogenous, meaning homemade endocannabinoid system. We make different cannabis-like substances ourselves, homegrown, homemade stuff that act on our nervous system. So here, if you see this green arrow, this is, for instance, THC hitting a cannabinoid receptor in the nerves in the brain, causing a symphony of neurotransmitters hitting receptors and causing whatever action needs to happen in that nerve. Cannabinoids, these yellow molecules can be CBD, CBG, or others that also have an effect. So this just tells you we can be influenced by outside cannabinoids or the ones we make ourselves. And in order to survive and have a quality of life, we need to know when to relax, when it's time to eat, when it's time to sleep, and to promote the qualities of all of these things. Also, there's an immune function to the endocannabinoid system to protect ourselves from injury, for the immune system, and to forget pain. So those 5 functions are critical, and our homemade system knows exactly which cannabinoid to make to relax and which cannabinoid to secrete when it's time to eat, which drives our appetite. But the plant-based cannabinoids, that also influences these functions. So why would we use cannabis as medicine? When and why? And there are symptoms. So most people have heard about cannabis helping with appetite and nausea from chemotherapy, or helping reduce pain or helping a person sleep. And I'll touch on that. And what about the cancer control? What about using it just for fighting cancer? And there's a lot. I'm going to go through the, there's just extreme viewpoints on it. And I know the truth is somewhere in the middle and it's developing. I'll get into that. But back into the Cannabis 101 is we have the plant here. And the valuable medicinal parts of the plant are in the small parts, in the bud, where you have the highest concentration of cannabinoids and THC. And that's these, if you looked under a microscope, you'd see tiny little liquid-looking droplets. The sugar leaves, again, smaller parts of the plant have more medicine in them. And the trichomes, this is not a very good slide, but those are the little liquidy dots of secreted substance from the plant that makes it aromatic and makes it medicinal or recreational, depending on what your intention is. And the big leaves that you see commonly in the logos, and that's actually not where there's a lot of medicine in there. And the stems are used, that's valuable in the hemp industry when they want to make clothing and rope, taking the fibers to make textiles. So depending on what you're growing the plant for, I will go over the differences between CBD and hemp. So you're going to get that, you're going to get the nomenclature right. So again, this is a depiction of your body's endogenous cannabinoids like AEA, 2AG, and then your plant-based cannabinoids, all having some sort of action on your nervous system. Delta-9 THC is what we do know that's the most psychoactive ingredient of cannabis. It works primarily on CB1 receptors, which are mostly in the brain, but it's also throughout the body. But this is the stuff that makes the driving reckless. It's the stuff that is likely, it is responsible for the 9% of addiction that people can experience. So when people say cannabis is not addictive, they are wrong. When they say everyone gets addicted to cannabis, they're wrong too. So if you think 9% of the time, there's a chance that someone can develop a very unhealthy relationship with it. But I'll talk about that contrast with other substances like alcohol and cocaine. Those are, I would say, far worse things to get addicted to. But still, addiction to anything is not good. CBD counteracts THC. It's between the two cannabinoids. It's THC and CBD, which we would say are the rock stars of the cannabis cannabinoid system. And there are more cannabinoids coming out, being sold on the market, which we know very little to nothing about. But CBD modulates how THC works. So it helps reduce the psychoactivity, the high. It can dampen it down. It may reduce the unpleasant psychological side effects of THC. So if somebody took too much of an edible and they felt really stoned and strange, you could take some extra CBD from hemp to overcome that, in addition to time. And CBD itself has anti-nausea, neuroprotective, and anti-inflammatory properties in and of itself. So it's been called out. It's like a brand name now. It has CBD. Go get your gas and your CBD at the gas station. It's crazy. I see CBD at jewelry stores. It's like NorthShore, where I work, we were the first to carry CBD in the area, but it's because we knew how to use it medicinally. But now you can buy it anywhere, and that's because of the farm bill that allows farmers to grow hemp. It's now legal, so now you can sell CBD products, and it's a wide open market. So you'll see it everywhere. What about the different types of cannabis? We know about THC and CBD. THC, psychoactive. CBD, anti-inflammatory, not psychoactive. Then you've got these different types of cannabis like sativas and indicas. And in the purest sense, a sativa should be affecting mostly the mind, may be helpful for reducing depression, lifting up the mood. Think the giggles and the sensory overload of sativas. It's a tall, skinny plant, so I think of it as something that grows closer to your head, so more for mind stuff. Whereas indica, this is the way you remember indica is into bed or into couch. That's the strain that's most known for being pain managing to help promote sleep. So indicas at night into bed, or indica hybrid where it's a little bit sativa and indica for a mixed response. It's very hard to say whether a 50-50 of each is going to affect you exactly the way you'd predict it to be. It's a highly individualized substance that everyone can have a different reaction to. So you have to go low and slow. And I will go over microdosing guidelines, like how much to take and how do you know how do you read a label? Because when you get to the dispensary, it can be really overwhelming. Or if you're not even in the dispensary and you have to look at the dispensary menu and pick something from this crazy menu of hundreds of edibles and blueberry flavor, raspberry, I don't care what flavor it is. What you care about is the THC and the CBD content. Is the product you're going to get mostly THC? And that is not for beginners. These are for people who they respond to THC, they know, they're used to it, and I insist there's no driving or operating heavy machinery after using anything with THC in it. So we'll talk about ratios and such, but do the strains matter? Does it matter that it's a sativa or an indica? At least it gives you some guidance, but I've had people fall asleep on sativas and others tell me that indicas made them feel more hyper. There are no rules, so the best rule to follow would be the THC and CBD content, because you can get that information from the label. The reason why the strains may not matter as much is because there's been so much hybridization and crossbreeding that they've probably lost some of the classic characteristics of the plant. But I have folks who are, hey, sativas do exactly what you told me they would do. So the person will find out how it affects them. And also what's becoming important, in fact, already on the market, are the minor cannabinoids. And it's an alphabet soup of C's and B's and G's and T's. So you can see right there, CBN, all the way through to THCA and CBDA, just as a little pearl. With THCA, that means it's the non-decarboxylated raw form of THC, the kind you would get in a plant. For instance, if you just took the plant and the sugar buds and all that, and you just ate it, or you pressed the juice out and drank the juice. It's the unheated plant before it becomes THC, because heat has to be applied to the substance to turn it into full-blown THC or full-blown CBD, which has different characteristics. THCA and CBDA are not supposed to have psychoactive properties. There's still going to be a lot of work to prove, is that really true? If you gave THCA to 500 people and you surveyed them 2 hours later, would that really be true? So right now we're going off of kind of rumors and off of some research that says it's not psychoactive, but again, everyone's different. So be very careful with the minor cannabinoids, because they could be potentially psychoactive and you won't know until you find out. Terpenes, this is the one I had alluded to a little bit, or barely alluded to at all. These are the essential oils. So if you're into essential oils, you're into terpenes. This is the part of the plant that has the aroma, the aromatic properties of, say, pine, like pinene. and it may have some medicinal value. So if you wanted to skip over cannabis completely and just get into essential oils, you could get pine and use that for various conditions here. Pinene is most known for its memory boosting properties, for alertness. So you might see that in people who, get the foggy brain, that you might want some essential oil of pine around, unless you're allergic or you hate it. But pinene is also found in cannabis, so it actually may smell like pine when it's cooked or smoked. And you sometimes get that information on the cannabis label. But the other times, if any of you are patients or customers of a dispensary, you don't even see pinene listed on the label. And some of the times you will, because it's not required by law to list it. And I think it's probably mighty expensive for the companies to analyze all that. So of course they're going to, put down what's legally required for the label. But if you get lucky and you get these labels, and oh, pinene's good for this. And you can find this information on leafly.com. Okay. Myrcene, found in mangoes, cardamom, cloves, with a musky, earthy, and herbal smell. That's more known for its sedating or couch lock properties. May also help with the insomnia and pain. I'd probably think of this as an indica-oriented terpene, but you can also find it in foods: lemongrass, thyme, and hops. And then limonene, known for its bright citrusy flavor. When you peel or you're zesting a lemon and you get that bright thing of lemon in your nose, that's limonene. And it's, I don't know, I just feel a little bit of a boost after I smell orange, lime, or lemon. So it's good for elevated mood, stress relief, great as an essential oil by itself. Also for nausea, I find just the lemon, I think maybe others think it makes them more nauseated, but I like this more than the florals. When feeling nauseated, I don't think lavender smells good to me, but I like mint and lime, things that smell like food that get your taste buds going. Okay. Caryophyllene, this is from black pepper extract, known for stress relief, found in cloves and cinnamon. And so there's some interesting things about antidotes against a bad trip. So if you took way too much cannabis and you were feeling really weird, and you wanted to do something about it other than just wait it out, you can chew on some black peppercorns, because the terpenes in there just pure black peppercorn may counteract the side effect of the cannabis that you just took. So it's interesting. Same thing goes with, taking a bite of on a lime or lemon wedge, or sniffing some pine. I don't know about mango as an anti-cannabis hack, but think about maybe keeping some black pepper around and orange juice, nice cold glass of water, and rest if you've taken too much. Linalool is from lavender. This is more from a mood, kind of chills out, sedating. You find it in lavender, so think about that. And insomnia, very nice if you like the aroma of lavender for insomnia and for calming. Okay, so reading labels. This is where it is all over the place, but you will have some very basic information from the Illinois dispensaries, because they have to put the name. So Blue Dream is the strain. Hybrid just means it's either a combo of sativa. It's a combo of sativa or indica, but on this you can't tell if it's mostly sativa or mostly indica. So, oh well, okay, that wasn't super helpful, but it would have helped if it was just indica. Then into bed, sleepy, pain, calming. Maybe not take that in the daytime if you need to be awake. Type flower means the bud. That's something that is either smoked or it is cooked in something. So you can make your own edibles or infused oils. And then, of course, they have dates. And then here you have THC to CBD, and they give you a ratio of 11:1. So would a beginner want to start with this? No. Okay. If you see predominant THC to CBD and you have no clue, you can just tell. Like even when they only use, if you covered up that 11:1 and you just saw 13.2% to 1.2% CBD, you know that that's not for beginners. Okay, another one. Here is where you've got, sorry, it's so fuzzy. You have this nice list of terpenes. I sometimes see this from products in Illinois. It just depends. But here's your name, the Afghani X Sour Diesel. The names just kill me. I used to be really uptight about them. And now I'm like, they're easier to remember than many of the drugs we've been forced to memorize as physicians, because we have to remember two names, generic and name brand. And they never really tell you always what they do. But this, man, this is the opposite of what I've had to learn in pharmacology. So this has, it's hard to read, but what's nice is they actually have to, in Illinois, you have to check for bacteria counts and mold and spores so that you know what you're getting isn't contaminated with junk. Because the last thing you need is somebody's moldy old cannabis that got moldy and you can't tell, and then the person smokes it and now they got a nice aspergillus fungus ball in their lungs. So that's why I don't like cannabis coming from unknown sources, or illegal sources, because at least you get this kind of quality control. Delta 9 THC here, you can see 18.57%. And remember, we have to compare apples to apples. So CBD max, same way to measure. Would this be good for a beginner? What do you think, Savina? No, it's predominant Delta 9 THC. So no, please don't. All these other terpenes are nice to know, but it's so hard to know how it's going to affect you. All I can say is that this is probably flower that's going to be high THC. It's going to make someone feel pretty high, stoned. And if someone's going to use it, it's got to be in just very small doses, or that person's very experienced with it. But beta caryophyllene, this is the black pepper extract. This is the myrcene, limonene. It's got a bunch of different things in it for the memory, for the mood, energy, caryophyllene, anti-inflammatory. So that's the thing with cannabis. It's not just one ingredient. It's a host or an entourage effect of a bunch of different chemicals working in concert in your unique chemistry, creating a very unique response that does wear off over time. Okay, so how can you take it in? These are basic things. You've got the inhalation method. I don't know anyone who really does tea very much, but if you have a card, you can grow 5 plants in Illinois at home. And this is where you would take your raw leaves and make a tea of it. It's a very weak way to activate your cannabis, but it might be something to consider. Hard to regulate the dose on that. Then you have the oils or the tinctures that go under the tongue, the edibles, and then here's vaping. And this is a volcano. This is just, I have no relationship with the company, but this has been around a long time. This is like a $600 device. Clearly not portable, but some of my patients say this is like, much more tolerable way to take it in. There are other devices like the packs or the aerizer that can help. You can take the flower or the green herb and put it into that and then vape the flower. Okay, and then here's some examples of vaping, which of course, before the COVID-19 pandemic, we had an opioid crisis and a vaping pandemic. Do you remember those mini pandemics seemingly? So I'm not a fan of vaping, if at all possible. I'm not a fan of smoking either, but I understand that there are patients, they've tried edibles, they've tried topical creams, they've tried the oils under the tongue, and this is the only way that works. So I get it. But if you can hold off on putting stuff in your lungs, I think that's much better. But there is a benefit. The benefit of inhaling is the immediate effect. Between from immediate to 30 seconds to a minute, you feel the impact of the cannabis, and it's easy to redose when it wears off. So cannabis, when it's smoked or vape, hits faster and it leaves the body faster. So it's a bit more controllable. I have some patients who, when they have trouble falling asleep and staying asleep, so they'll use an inhalation, like 1 or 2 hits off of a joint or the vape to get them sleepy right away. And they take an edible that kicks in 2 or 3 hours later so that they stay down. So some people will layer it that way. So keep in mind, there's many options there. But I'm part of this group called Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. which is to bring rational legalization of adult use cannabis so we can tax it, regulate it, know what we're talking about here instead of fostering the illegal market. Whether this has been successful or not is still an experiment, a national experiment. But we do not believe that vaping is a good idea, especially in the COVID era. And also when people pass joints, and I mean, come on, right now we should all know that passing things around and that was in another person's mouth is not a good idea. So it's a nice way to spread the COVID-19 virus. Okay. And for edibles, so this is your microdosing advice. You'll see many kinds. Like here's a piece of chocolate. It's in a packet. It looks like a Ghirardelli's chocolate square, maybe smaller than that. And it says on here in tiny print, 10 milligrams of THC in the whole piece. So when you start like you've never had an edible before, you want to cut that into 4 pieces, 4 equal pieces, or even 8 pieces. And just take that tiny little bit, write down the time you ate it, and then just watch the clock. In 1 or 2 hours, edibles tend to kick in. Some people feel it much faster, others feel it much slower. It all depends on your digestive tract. So if you have gastroparesis, it may take much longer to feel it. Who knows? There are some folks who are just super sensitive, but it doesn't work right away. And that's the danger of edibles, is that if a person doesn't realize it's going to take an hour or 2 to kick in, they might just say, well, let me just eat this whole piece, maybe a second piece. And this is where we get the high schoolers who ate a whole, like 5 cannabis-laced cookies, and then they're in the ER, totally out of their mind, feeling horrible. So be careful with edibles. Start with 1/4 or even 1/8 of the piece. And if that didn't do anything in 2 hours, by that time you probably are already asleep. The next night, then take a little bit more. Take 1/4 to a half of a piece, and then see how you are the next morning. So if you slept well and you didn't have a hangover, you found the dose that works. And if you feel like, oh, wow, that really helped my sleep, then try and go back to the dispensary and make sure you have a good supply of this, because they run out of stuff all the time. But I think it's getting better. Cannabis oil is another way to do it. Maybe 1 to 5 drops under the tongue to start with. This one can probably kick in 15 to 30 minutes because you have sublingual or absorption through the blood vessels in the mouth. So maybe a little bit faster than an edible. Less of the sugar issue as well. You don't have to worry about the digestive tract stuff, but some people cannot tolerate the flavor. Others think it's no big deal. Again, super individualized. Back to my comment again about flavor. I don't care if it's chocolate, mint, bubblegum, popcorn flavor, bacon flavor, does not matter. And I kind of wish it would just there wouldn't be as many choices out there, because it just makes everyone confused. You really need to know about how much you're taking and mark the time so you don't overdose. Good news about overdosing on cannabis is if it's all by itself and you overdose on cannabis, your chances of dying from an overdose are pretty nil. You could feel really weird and bad for a long time if you overdose, but there's not a death rate associated with it, unlike opioids, where you take too many Norcos, you could die from taking too many, from the respiratory arrest that can happen. But of course, if you mix drugs, then it's like, you got to be careful with all of that. RSO oil, also known as Rick Simpson oil, is a concentrate, and it looks like motor oil from here. Thicker, not like the drops you saw in the bottle. The dose you start with this is a grain of rice sized amount, which to me, I'm Filipino, so we have all kinds of rice sizes. So you've got your broken rice, you got long grain wild rice, basmati, like what is it? So I like to start off with, not me, I don't use this at all, but if you took a toothpick and you just put it into the little ellipsis of that bulging out, and then you have a residue, then you put the toothpick under your tongue and then just suck it on it. Start with that. And then you can go up to gradually a grain of rice sized amount, especially for the beginners. Some people, this one, the flavor can be quite strong. And this is where a Tic Tac or a chocolate chip or Altoid mint make a difference, but it can get around the teeth. So be careful if someone's already nauseous and not eating much, this may be a really rough way to go. Now, there are also folks who will take RSO oil because they like the oil, but they put it in an empty gel cap that you can get at Whole Foods or online, and you put that little smear inside the gel cap and swallow it so you don't taste it, and you don't have to deal with the sugar issues with the edibles, but it becomes like an edible because it still needs to be broken down in the stomach. Topicals. So you got patches. This is what patient told me. They liked patches because if you are not wanting to feel it anymore, you just take it off and then that's it. You're done. So that actually is very smart because with an edible, it's there. It stays there until it's all digested and eliminated. And this is the patch is more discreet and so on. So at the tender price of $10 to $20 a patch, it gets really expensive. I think patches are probably the most expensive way to get cannabis in your system, but a nice option and there aren't that many choices. There aren't like a gazillion different strengths and ratios, at least not in Illinois. And then you've got creams, which I think are wonderful. So most of the creams you're going to find in a dispensary, there's usually just 3 kinds: high THC, high CBD, and then 1-to-1 CBD to THC. That's all you're really going to find at this time. So try them all. Just be aware that THC can still enter the bloodstream and cause a psychoactive effect. I had a very small fraction of patients say they felt something when they put it on. Most of my patients don't feel anything in terms of like being impaired, but be wary that, if you got in a car accident and you were on cannabis even a week ago, that if you got in a car accident and they drug tested you, you will be positive for THC. And then it gets tricky because they're going to have to figure out, were you under the influence at the time or was it a past exposure? And that's where it gets dicey. So do not use cannabis with THC in it and then drive. It's a really nice way to start is just take it at bedtime, sleep it off. In the morning, be fresh, you've slept well, more energy, everything's better when you sleep well. And don't use anything until you're home for the day. Get your errands done, schlep around to your appointments or the store, and then don't use anything until you get home, unless you're being driven everywhere, and then that's fine. But don't drive under the influence, even though it's legal and you're a patient of the program. It's like alcohol. We can all buy alcohol. It doesn't give us a right to go like do some shots and then get in a car. Okay, so another intriguing method is suppositories, rectally or vaginally. So this is good for pelvic pain or interstitial cystitis, bladder pain, tailbone pain, people who have a lot of lumbosacral issues. There's something, I think, mental too about putting the medicine close to where everything bothers you. And I've had some very interesting, nice responses from patients. You also won't have a lot of choices with the suppositories when you buy them from a dispensary, but there are also ways to make your own your own suppositories with, for instance, coconut oil, because it gets solid at when it's cooled down, and you can put RSO oil or tincture in there, mix it up and make your own. But that's also for advanced users who know what's the ratio. I'm not an expert in figuring out all those recipes, but believe me, there's a lot of recipes online. So that's an inexpensive way to make your own suppositories. You can buy silicone molds on Amazon and make your own batches of stuff. But just be wary, your homemade stuff can vary, and you don't know, unless you're like really precise and take good notes. And I'm sure you would be, but that's an option. Okay. We can't forget about the pharmaceutical drugs, prescriptions that have cannabinoid roots. Dronabinol, for instance, which is generic Marinol, is an appetite stimulant, and it's covered by insurance for 2 conditions. One is HIV, AIDS, wasting syndrome, and those undergoing chemotherapy and having nausea and vomiting. This is a viable option if someone were admitted to the hospital, they're a cannabis patient, but you're not allowed to bring cannabis to the hospital, even though you're a card-carrying member. We've had a few patients who, there's just not much said about this, but because it's still federally illegal and hospitals can have any policy stance they want, currently, I know of no hospital that allows people to bring their own legally obtained cannabis to the hospital. So you will if they find out security at our system, they will confiscate, and then they will have some family member pick it up and drive it home. They're really uptight about it. Things may change as the laws change, but right now, just don't bring it to the hospital. And you could ask for dronabinol in the hospital, which is synthetic THC. So I thought that's interesting as an option. Epidiolex is another one that's been approved for pediatric seizure syndrome called Dravet Syndrome. If any of you have seen the documentaries by Sanjay Gupta on CNN about a little girl named Charlotte who had horrible pediatric seizures. She eventually died, unfortunately, but this begat the whole cannabis could be medicine. Look at this little girl, and her seizures largely went away or were very much controlled on CBD. But it is available in the US, but it is crazy expensive. I haven't even ordered it for anybody. I haven't seen a patient with Dravet syndrome yet. And even if I did, the pediatric neurologist is going to take care of that prescription because there's probably a lot of prior authorizations. I'm sure this crowd knows a lot about the expense of new drugs when they come out on the market. Cannabis is much more affordable. Even though it's expensive, it is not Epidiolex expensive. Then we've got nabiximols, not available in the US, and then Nabilone or Sesamet, which is also available, but I don't use much. Okay, so I've already emphasized with the cannabis, not in the hospital. And if a person were in the hospital, you could start with a 2.5 milligram dronabinol pill. If it's like, I can't get my cannabis, but I need something, you could go with a small dose. You'd have to ask the attending physician, would you consider prescribing this? Because it's totally legal. The hospital formularies should carry it or could get it for you. And you could add CBD from a legal hemp-derived product, but then it gets tricky with taking your own meds from home and your vitamins. Oftentimes the hospitals don't allow that much, but dronabinol plus a hemp product is like a full spectrum cannabis product. So especially if you're one day traveling to a state or a country that is not allowing cannabis, then dronabinol you can carry around as a legal prescription. You'd have to ask your doctor for that. Common side effects, probably you see the big red dry eyes, dry mouth. It can work in your favor or against you. So if you want sedation, it causes sedation. If you don't want it, it causes sedation for some. Anxiety, some people feel more stressed about it, anxious, paranoid even, or even panicky. Dizziness can happen, heart rate can go up, an altered sense of time, and the psychoactivity, changes in visual perception. You can see here the big circles are the more common side effects. Some people can feel more depressed on it. Some people can feel euphoric on it. So hard to know. And then coughing, of course, from the inhaled version. Serious adverse effects are addiction. I mentioned the 9%. Psychosis, that actually it might uncover schizophrenia in a person who is already destined to have that, or just literally just really freak out, which is the non-medical term for psychosis. I'm not a psychiatrist, but it's a very difficult thing to see and go through. Cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, the ERs are seeing more of this, much more of this, where cannabis makes the person nauseous. They throw up, they feel nauseous because of cannabis. It goes away when cannabis is stopped. And one of the cues that it's cannabis hyperemesis syndrome is that the person feels better after a hot shower or a hot bath. So that means that that person should not be using cannabis because it just makes them feel ill. And then the long-term metabolic consequences of having the munchies. So weight gain and not being able to control oneself around indulgent foods. Usually I would say it's THC that's probably triggering the appetite stimulation. So be wary of that side effect. So again, cessation of cannabis is the best advice for those who get that nausea and vomiting because of cannabis. Some other things besides hot showers is hot pepper cream on the abdomen. And then in the ER, if you were there, you might get haloperidol. So this is for the medical crowd. And by the way, I'm giving this very same talk to physicians. So we're all pretty much on the same page in terms of knowledge base. So this is all professional level stuff, high level stuff. Okay, what happens when you use cannabis when you're too young, too much? I used to hear the mantra that, oh, well, if you're under 25 years of age, for sure, you're going to be duller and less IQ, less motivated than you could have been. And I thought that was really true until I read on drugabuse.gov, the website, the agency that looks at all substances for their abuse potential. And they say that this is controversial. So it depends. It really depends. But the younger a person uses it, like starting at age 12, smoking pot several days a week at a young age and really not stopping, maybe taking a few breaks. Those are the folks you would think, hey, there's probably, you're doing something to your brain. So we don't know, but I still am not a fan of anyone who's pediatric to be using this. But what is that cutoff where your brain is still in the soft boiled stage and still could be molded by the dopamine response from taking cannabis and getting a sense of pleasure and reward from the dopamine and doing it over and over again? So hard to know. And then you hear about people anecdotally saying, oh, I've smoked pot since I was 14 and I'm fine. I don't know, who are these people and why are their brains more protected than others? Hard to say. Okay, remedies. I did allude to this before. So this list again will be in your slides. If you have a bad cannabis reaction, think the peas, pine nuts, pistachios, pepper. But then there's also citrus, which is not a pea. That was not convenient. I have no idea where you're going to get calamus plant roots, but that is an old-fashioned remedy. Choline, which you can get from a vitamin store. Don't ask me the dose. I don't know. And then there's this company that makes something called Undo capsules. I have never seen patients actually try it, but I hear this going around in the medical cannabis community that might help do a reset if a person builds up tolerance and they find they're using cannabis and they have to keep using more and more to get the same effect. I think taking tolerance breaks can be helpful. We don't know the ideal tolerance break. Like, is it a day? Is it 2 days? Is it a week? We don't know. No research on that I could find. And then time will heal it all. Hydration, reassurance. Come into when you're using cannabis, if you are, be in a relaxed frame of mind, positive mental attitude, nice music on, a good atmosphere that you can enhance by being under the influence versus I shouldn't be doing this, paranoid, anxiety, and then that just heightens, that could just heighten, but everyone's different. Okay. So what is the difference between dependence and addiction? Dependence, and we can have this with many substances, alcohol, opioids, benzodiazepines, sleep medications, but you feel a physical withdrawal when not taking the drug anymore. And the symptoms can be crankiness, mood, trouble sleeping, appetite goes down, cravings, restlessness, other physical discomforts. And when it comes to cannabis withdrawal, they tend to peak within the first week after quitting and can last up to 2 weeks, typically. Of course, that can vary amongst people, depending on how long and how much a person was using beforehand. So if someone's going to be tapering, stopping after using it for a long time, taper down. Don't just cold turkey it unless you're willing to endure a really rough couple of weeks at least, which can feel like a long time. Addictions. This is different. I hear people say, I don't want to get addicted to it. I'm like, well, most likely you won't get addicted to it, but it's possible that you could become dependent on something. But addiction is when there's the judgments out the window, bad decisions are made. I'll drive anyway on this. I will steal for this stuff. I think about it the first, and I'm going to do whatever I'm going to take it, even though it's a bad idea. So the risk is 9% I mentioned, but it's higher if cannabis is started frequently in the teens. So I have my resources there. So addiction, again, that is a potential, and that's where you get a lot of vehement objection from the addiction community about the adult use, allowing for that and the marketing that happens. And that's a whole other ball of wax, but just these are the numbers I've seen, and it's real, it can happen. So we have to respect it. Okay, what's the difference when I get CBD? Well, what about CBD? And when I say when a patient says, or a person, even a doctor goes, well, what about CBD? I'm like, CBD from a dispensary where there can be a little THC above the legal limit? Or do you mean CBD from the hemp that's grown legally and sold to in the gas stations and the, the pharmacy, over-the-counter places, the hemp-only stores, you see the kratom, all of that. Hemp is supposed to be less than 0.3% THC, which makes it legal to purchase over the counter because it's not supposed to have an appreciable psychoactive effect. When you see the seeds, so these are hemp seeds, and this to a cannabis medicinal grower or a recreational person is horrible. Apparently, they hate when they see seeds. It means the female has been fertilized by the male. They make little babies, and here are the babies, the seeds. But this is great if you want hemp seeds and you want to put it in your cereal or your oatmeal, or if you are growing hemp. I'm not a grower, so I'm sure they don't like seeing seeds either, but this is where you're going to be getting the CBD from. They extract it from hemp plants, and they have to extract a lot. They probably need a lot of hemp to get that little bit of CBD that's in there. I'm sure that's part of why the price is so high. And then there also is that whole thing that, well, the price is so high, why would we lower it? I have no idea what goes into the pricing of these items, but they're so expensive, and not sure why. But I would be wary of super, super cheap CBD, because then you don't know if you're really getting actual CBD in the product. So, there's a website called consumerlab.com or consumerlabs.com. If you want to look up the latest ratings on different CBD brands, which ones have what's in the label, is in the bottle, even price analysis, all of that stuff, that's a really good resource, because I don't want to share brand names with you, because that's, I don't have any disclosures, but you can find that information, and it does change over time. Okay, the Farm Bill, as I mentioned, it's still the same cannabis sativa plant, but grown a certain way, no more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis of the psychoactive THC. And so they took hemp off of the Controlled Substances Act. Hence, you saw the explosion of available products. So it's expensive. There's a lot of claims on it with scant, mixed, or no evidence. I do find it clinically helpful for relaxation, sleep, and I forgot to put on there pain. So that's something to consider. But what about CBD that you've read as a promising anti-cancer drug? This is where we're getting into the meat. So I'm past now Cannabis 101 and microdosing and all of that. I see all these questions in the chat and some Q&A, but we'll get to that at the end. So I appreciate your patience on this. And I hope I'm answering questions as they come, you might find your questions answered as I speak. So, this came out, this is recent, November 2020. So we're going to keep seeing cannabis research, I can't even keep up anymore. But when it becomes federally legal and in terms of regulated like alcohol or tobacco, we're going to see an explosion of the human trials we so desperately need to really stick up those claims. Are we going to hold them up that cannabis cures cancer? You read so many websites there. I'll tell you this, in the medical community and in the research I've done, I wish I could say cannabis definitively cures cancer. Okay, so I'll just tell you that we don't know yet. And if it did, what's the dose? Because it comes with a price, comes with THC. You can't, at the doses that are proposed for fighting cancer, the psychoactivity that can come with it may not make it a viable option for a person. But CBD, what about that by itself? I thought this was interesting. This came out a couple of years ago about false news of cancer cures with cannabis. And this research group actually surveyed all these articles and websites of anything that had a claim that cannabis cured cancer. And they brought out some of the most hits, the most internet hits for articles. And I've actually looked for some of these. You can find some of them. Others have taken the posts down. Number one was the Cancer Institute finally admits that marijuana kills cancer. That's like a gross misinterpretation of something that was slightly I think I forgot which institution they were talking about. Because I couldn't find the article anymore. So I couldn't even figure out where that came from, but it had tons of hits. This one, the mom who took illegal cannabis oil to battle terminal cancer, given the all clear, how it saved her life after an incurable brain tumor. We may all have people we know, and I'm all for healing and these wonderful outcomes, but when you start to promote it to like, this is how it's going to happen for most everyone, then you start getting, I need more evidence for that. Okay, so let's see, where's my next? Oops, trying to advance. There we go. So here's the one with the mom. This was apparently in Britain. And you can see her story here. It was heavily hit. Many people opened this story. And then on NBC News, the FDA wants all that chatter to stop. And then I thought, oh my gosh, it's so extreme. There's one group that says it's a miracle cure. Why aren't the doctors paying any attention? All the scientists are idiots. I've heard this argument about all kinds of stuff. I run the integrative medicine program at NorthShore, and I remember doing this with acupuncture, trying to prove that it's a viable option. But there wasn't much research 20 years ago. Now there is. Now nobody really, there are people who still question it, but now we're at that point with cannabis now. So more research will come 20 years from now. The stuff we're saying, bad mouthing about it now, will be to the wayside. We'll know much more. Just like a year ago, we know nothing about COVID. Now we know a whole lot. We still have much to learn. So CBD, what is the research to date that it might treat cancer itself? Glioblastoma is the one human study of 9 patients. That's it. That's the most human studies, not test tubes, not rats. So when you see a study that says this study said that it cures breast cancer, take a look at deeply and see, was it done in a petri dish or in a mouse or a rat? When you see clinical, you see humans involved, they say men, women, there's age, then this is a human study. So they'll be coming out as we go, but this is all I could find as of 3 months ago. 9 patients who received 200 to 400 milligrams of CBD a day, which is a lot, especially if you consider that usually one whole bottle of tincture is 100 milligrams of CBD. They're drinking multiple, a whole lot more. These are clinical studies, so they can get that stuff. Grade 4 glioblastoma multiforme, these folks also got surgery, radiation therapy, and chemo, and received the CBD. They found that their lives were prolonged, average of 22 months beyond the prognosis. 2 patients had no signs of disease progression for 3 or more years, which to me is amazing. And I have, was it the chemo, the radiation, was it just the cannabis? I think that sounds like a combination of everything. That's the inherent nature of integrative medicine, is use everything you possibly can. We're not going to probably isolate one reason why this all worked, but I love these kinds of hopeful studies, because it's like, how do you explain that? Yet in the academic world, that would be marginalized as a preliminary study. We need more research, no conclusion. But, maybe a bit promising, but not enough for your neuro-oncologist to say, go ahead and use that, because I really think it worked because the research is ironclad. This is not ironclad research because it's only 9 patients. But the thing with CBD is that it's a pretty low risk thing to try. Other than the expense, taking 200 to 400 mg of CBD a day would cost a lot. But feeling sleepy, feeling kind of weird, stomach indigestion. Some people get headaches from taking higher amounts of CBD or even any CBD. So again, you got to start low and go slow and build up. And you can see the dose range is still not set. Everything else is it was in test tubes in mice. Breast cancer. I was really hoping, of all the research we've done on breast cancer, unless someone can tell me in the chat, like, I did see one, maybe something came out after I did my literature review. The test tube and mouse studies, though, look promising. So we can't ignore that. It's just that I'd love to see. No, physicians don't really pay attention to it as much without human clinical trials. because what happens in a mouse or a test tube could be very different than what happens in a person. Many drug trials have failed that way. It looked promising. They did it in humans, didn't work out. Drug never came to market, that kind of thing. So lung cancer, one human case report of an 81-year-old man who took 2% CBD oil. I couldn't find the details on exactly that, what brand, I have nothing, but the tumors regressed without chemo or radiation 1 year later on CT scan. Wow, it's amazing. So of course you write that up and you say there's something to it, and this begets more interest and more excitement, but just be wary. You'll see companies take something like that and blow it up to cannabis cures cancer. And it's like, this is one human case report. I would love for everyone to be that case report and be, totally excited about it, but it's hard to say. Colorectal, again, no human trials, but they have done research in test tube and mouse models. Leukemia and lymphoma in test tubes, no mice studies. There's an interesting study here that for this particular group, they said, don't combine vitamin E and N-acetylcysteine with CBD. And they felt that those antioxidants may interact with the CBD and the tumor killing effect, which we also say during chemotherapy. And it's totally theoretical, not yet tested in humans. I take it with a big boulder of salt, but I think antioxidants, like getting your vitamin E from eating nuts and whole grains, beans, these are natural ways to get vitamin E, which are also cancer fighting. But again, when a research study brings something like that up, then everyone gets all in a tizzy. It's till you've also tested that it's true, take with a grain of salt, because we haven't proven that in humans either. So I don't know whether you should believe that or not yet. Prostate cancer, there's one animal study so far, but multiple test tube studies. And then interestingly, in pancreatic cancer, they thought that with Keytruda or nivolumab and CBD, the nivolumab might reduce response to immunotherapy when combined with CBD and or THC. Caution, don't use. So, oh my gosh, what? So these are these new immunotherapies where you don't really know what's what. I have to look at that. If I believe that was a human trial. I'm not totally sure, but oh yeah, it's in humans because they have nivolumab and CBD with THC studied in stage 4, non-small cell lung cancer, clear cell renal carcinoma, advanced melanoma. This is the study. So you could check that out. Anyone who's on nivolumab, is there something specific that it interacts with? Which is why pretty much all oncologists just say, don't take anything I don't know about because it might interact with your immunotherapy. Again, a new drug. You don't know how it interacts. We can't patent cannabis, so no one's really going to do cannabis nivolumab trials. I'd love for them to do really good ones, but just be wary. But if the benefits outweigh the risk and the person's nauseous, they can't keep anything down, and the Zofran's not working, and where you're at your wit's end, and then use the cannabis, the benefits outweigh the risk because the person's actually throwing up. They're actually nauseous. They're at risk of dehydration. You've got to go with what's really happening in front of you, because there will always be a theoretical risk. And that's trying to hedge those bets that's why medicine's an art. Okay. CBD, vitamin E, NAC. I think I looked at that a bit further. Sorry, I have so many the potential interactions of CBD, vitamin E, and NAC. This is where, again, that's that same study where do antioxidants interact with a cancer killing agent? Theoretical. Okay. That's an old study too, so no one's done a follow-up to that. Okay, Cannabis One, legal stuff. We're shifting gears. Here it is. It's grouped with heroin, LSD, ecstasy, peyote, methaqualones. Nice, right? That needs to change. And it will with our new administration at some point. And much of the country is going green. So I don't even know if this is totally up to date, but Chicago should be dark green because it's legal medically and recreationally. The rest of these gray states, it's not allowed in any form. But a lot of places have downgraded the penalties for carrying it to like a traffic violation and such. So things are changing. In the Midwest, there's different rules per state, and that's just for your interest, but every state is different. This I thought was a fun historical use. Cannabis used to be created by Eli Lilly. It used to be given to babies. Can you believe that? I love the infant's relief with the spirits of nitrate chloroform. It's a nice way to get your baby to sleep. Awful. It's terrible. But cannabis was used as a medicine until it was outlawed completely, and then everyone had to take it off during Prohibition. But alcohol came back, cannabis did not. And there's a lot of there's a lot of race and privilege involved in that, because cannabis was the poor man's or poor woman's alcohol. So there was no organization around, there was no bootleg distilleries of this. They just didn't have the resources to keep something like that going, and speakeasies. And here we have large, billions spent on the alcohol industry, and cannabis is only getting its footing recently. Okay, so I can't leave a lecture on oncology without talking about non-pharmacologic pain management, but that's not the focus of this talk. But please consider acupuncture, massage, staying physically active gently to what your energy allows with stretching and yoga, strengthening the core, keeping flexible. For the mind with talk therapy, living in the present, meditation. These are all things that the Cancer Wellness Center offers in various ways. Exploring your spiritual self, if that applies, or delving into religious practices that really help you get to a peaceful place. Then there's the physical modalities like PT, occupational therapy, chiropractic, and of course, healthy diet. And I mentioned movement earlier. This list is not exhaustive, but there are many resources in this highly resourced area of the world. Many practitioners, and I'll give a plug at the end to here. This is my team. We've been around for 21 years, and we have all those people who do those things or teach you how to do it. So I highly recommend checking it out, especially if you are wanting to combine your therapies with your conventional Western treatments or not. Either way, it all can be very helpful. So we have here, it's 7:05, and we have, I did so well, 25 more minutes to do question and answers. Ooh, yay, okay. So hopefully I didn't talk your ears off, but let's, we'll hear from Savina, who's moderating the question.
Yeah, and we've got a few questions. For those of you that have submitted, thank you so much. For those that are still thinking of questions, please use the Q&A box so that we can check them off as we read them off. But I'm going to switch to the first one that came in actually to the chat. Dr. Temple, can you talk about, I know you mentioned cannabis is not legal at the hospital, but there's medicinal or there's pharmaceutical options. Can they get that prescribed while they're receiving chemo or radiation? The person notes having nausea during radiation.
They could, although if your radiation is typically outpatient, so, the chemo's outpatient. So the only time you'd want, well, not the only time, but when a person's in the hospital because they need IV fluids, they need monitoring, they're sick enough to be in the hospital, and you're not allowed to take your cannabis, that is when you could request dronabinol as your cannabinoid to help tide you over until you get discharged. And then when you get home, use the medical cannabis. I get patients who I don't get it often anymore. They want dronabinol because it's from a pharmacy, they know exactly what's in it, but keep in mind, it's only THC. So you don't have the CBD component, and maybe THC may help fighting cancer too, but the research I found was primarily on CBD. So I like when I have a patient who's using a cannabinoid full spectrum product for their symptoms, I tell them, by the way, you're probably getting some anti-cancer benefits too. So the only main reason I see people asking for THC as a prescription is if they're traveling or they don't like the just the messiness of cannabis with all of its millions of ingredients. They just want that simple, straightforward THC, and it's covered by insurance if it's chemotherapy related nausea and vomiting. Otherwise, it's $5 to $10 per pill. And that's about the same cost, I think, as buying it at a dispensary, I think. So, good question.
And can people get it at the same day that they're receiving chemo, or would they need to request it in advance?
Well, if you're getting chemo, you're as an outpatient. So I don't know that they would dispense it to you right there. They're probably going to give you Zofran, something there that the team's more comfortable with. So you're probably not going to get dronabinol right then and there. They would prescribe it for you, and then you'd have to pick it up at the pharmacy. So you're not going to get it on site.
Okay, thank you for answering that. You did talk about usage under the age of 25. Can you talk about with pediatric cancer parents here, just to clarify regarding cannabis for kids undergoing chemo treatment who do have medical cards? Do you see a benefit to the population? And where would a parent go to find more information on cannabis and dosing?
Not many places to go for cannabis and dosing in kids. You are definitely on the forefront. You're basically training your pediatric oncology team, because you're going to be one of the few who are doing it for the first time. I have certified, my youngest patient was 5. Can you believe that? But this patient has had brain cancer, and we've already radiated it, we've cut it, we've given major drugs. At this point, you're like, if this child can sleep, the benefits outweigh the risk. So if we're willing to do hardcore Western things to someone that also impairs brain function, then cannabis, to me, if you can get relief from that, I think that it's worth it, especially using the lowest THC possible, because the CBD and just a smidge of THC may be enough. But I've had some, really a nice story coming out about a child who got past all that. He's 15 years old now. He's playing soccer. I mean, he's doing well. He has his issues, but it worked out really well. And the mom was very, really diligent advocate, all of that stuff. And we learned together. So that's the knowledge base right now. Maybe if you were in Colorado, you'll get a much more experience. Like, everyone there has like 15 years on us. We're still learning. And that's Illinois for you. And there are places that are starting after us. They know even less. So you know more than Ohio, which started 5 years later.
Thank you for answering that question. I'm just going to actually go down the list. Advertised on the internet are new CBD gummies containing no THC with heals without the high. Would you say CBD alone would be helpful for pain, specifically nerve pain? It
may be. So it's worth a try. Make sure obviously, if you buy a gummy that says CBD from a regular store and you don't need a cannabis card, it's got to be from hemp. The question is it worth anything? Does it have enough CBD to do anything to you for that price? So I would recommend going to consumer labs and reading like which brands are really good. I get all kinds of patients bringing in these random brands. They say, well, what do you think of this? I'm like, I don't know. I've never heard of that brand, or you're the only person I know that's using it. What do you think? And I always turn it back to, when you have it, do you feel pain relief? So very trial and error. Also trying the creams, that's really key as well.
And would you say CBD for neuropathy, hands and feet, would it be best to use a lotion? I know you talked about using it at the area that you feel the pain.
I think both. Neuropathy is really tough. It's one of those, I think acupuncture actually may work maybe with the cannabinoids, work better together. It's hard when the person's continually getting chemo and the chemo is causing the neuropathy and they keep getting it because they have to. That's hard to overcome because these are less toxic. They're not as strong. Like if I give someone arnica cream, I mean, you can definitely put it on, it'll take the edge off. But if the person has neuropathy and they're done with chemo and it's just been there, it's worth a try. I actually like using systemic or oral CBD. and the cream. You can combine both of those and see if you get a better outcome. But if you do acupuncture once a week, that also might make a big difference.
And would you say when you're doing CBD and CBD with THC or THC alone, would you say that people need to use it regularly to have the effect, the pain relief effect, or is sporadic enough?
Oh, sporadic's enough. That's what's nice. You can use it whenever you need it. You don't have to be committed to an every night thing. It's not one of those things that builds up and then if you don't, and that approach makes people feel really relieved, because most of my patients, they don't want to feel impaired at all. They want to feel sharp and remember everything. I do have patients that have chronic insomnia. They just can't fall asleep, can't stay asleep, and it's happening three or more times a night. Then it's like, why don't you take a dose every night and just microdose at bedtime and get 6 hours of sleep? It will do you wonders. So I do have those folks that's every day.
Thank you. And do you have a recommendation for people? I know you sort of said start and experiment as you go, but a ratio of THC to CBD for a beginner?
So I know that if you go to the dispensary, they have a 20-to-1. So 20 parts CBD to 1 part THC tincture. I've seen 10-to-1. So those are really good ways to start. I've also seen a tablet that's 14-to-1. So you could start with those really high CBD, very low ratios. And then if you find that you're taking like 2 dropperfuls and you don't feel anything, and you're doing the timing thing I told you to do, wait 2 hours for the edibles, wait 15 to 30 minutes for the oils, don't redose anything until you've been on this stuff for hours, like 2 to 4 hours before you take more. If you're finding you're like just taking more and it's not doing anything, then step it up to maybe a 1-to-1 CBD to THC. Like if you started at 20-to-1 and it didn't do anything, then go to 10-to-1. If that didn't do anything, the next step is 1-to-1. I don't know why there isn't a 5-to-1. I wish there were, and there might be someday, but from 10-to-1 goes 1-to-1. And then from 1-to-1 CBD to THC, then I've seen like high THC, where it's just a little CBD. That's for people who have advanced through the different steps. Was that clear? I hope that was.
I think so, yeah. And I think you sort of answered this question as you were presenting, but any tips on how to avoid feeling hungover the next day? Or is it just trial and error?
Other than the low and slow, and some people take it too late. Well, they should be getting to bed earlier, but if they wake up in the middle of the night and they're taking a 2 a.m. dose, and then they're still under the influence when it's 7 o'clock time to wake up, then that would be a reason. So take it earlier, move up your dosing time. Instead of 2 a.m., just take it right at bedtime. Other than that, those remedies I talked about, drinking or chewing like on some citrus, orange juice, lemonade, or chewing on a wedge, black pepper extract chewed on, pistachios, pine nuts. Those are some ways to get rid of cannabis side effect.
And are there any concerns about people that have gone through a stem cell transplant? The person notes potentially their hematologist and transplant doctor are maybe a little bit concerned about medical cannabis not being as regulated to use. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's much more, if we're using the regulation argument, then that should apply to everything. So the regulation, when you get cannabis from a dispensary, it's regulated in that it has, how much CBD and THC are in there. That it hasn't been allowed to grow mold and spores. That they haven't cut it with other illicit substances. So that, to me, that's like from like a very just ground zero expectation that it's regulated. The rest of it, maybe we need to refine that language to say that it's imprecise how it's going to affect a person. If you and I, Savina, both had a headache and we both took the same tincture, we can have very different responses. Whereas in Western medicine, you and I both get a Tylenol. We both get a Motrin, and you can like really understand it because it's been studied so much, because a drug doesn't come to market without knowing a whole lot. With cannabis, because of those reasons I told you, we break things down very differently. We can have vastly different reactions with the same stuff. And that's what makes it so hard to study and so hard for, I've heard physicians erroneously say, well, it's still not legal, so I can't certify you. And that's not true. In Illinois, any physician with a bona fide relationship with you as their doctor-patient, they can certify a patient for cannabis. There's no extra training in Illinois or certification, but the doctors have the right to refuse. So if they're not comfortable with it, then you can't force them to, you can't sue them into doing it for you. What's the point of that anyway? Most people just go find somebody else.
Thank you so much.
So back to the transplant question. So what I don't know is, like, will it affect the transplant? Will you get rejection? It's a little bit, we don't know. We don't know. But if the person is feeling very nauseous, they have a lot of pain, they can't sleep, they've tried all the, the trusted medications, it's not working, there's too many side effects, then you think, okay, maybe it's worth it with cannabis to see. But I can't say, oh, well, here's a study that said it was safe in a bone marrow transplant. I don't know. But have bone marrow transplant patients used cannabis? Yes, I'm sure they have.
And two questions on edibles. Firstly, what about snoozeberry edibles versus indica
5 to 1,
edibles?
that is the one 5 to 1 there is. Oh, you got me. Someone's good. Snoozeberry is the only 5 to 1 edible I've seen. I just haven't seen a 5 to 1 oil. So what was the question about it specifically?
If you had any comments about it, and then do edibles expire was the follow-up sort of.
Sure. Edibles are as good as the vehicle they're in. So if it's, been 2 years and the thing looks moldy, if anything, the gummies get hard or the chocolate gets a little bit rancid, then, it probably just reduces the effect of the cannabinoids. You kind of just waste your money. But also think about food spoilage. Oils, they should be tightly kept. They can go rancid, just like if you had old olive oil or old butter, things can get oxidized and old. So honestly, it's probably fine after 6 months. It's probably still good, just like many pharmaceuticals are still good. But once you start getting into, it's been a year or any beyond a year, you start going, is this going to give me a tummy ache because it's gotten rotten? So edibles, think about that.
Yeah. Someone commented that GW Pharmaceuticals might have data on pediatric doses. Is that something you're familiar with?
So remember I talked about Epidiolex?
Okay.
And they're the ones who created that very, very expensive, yet very intriguing CBD for pediatric seizures. Yes. Sativix as well. So they do have dosing, and you can use that, extrapolate it, because you can kind of see in your cannabis supply how much CBD and THC are in there.
Thank you. And do you have a reliable resource where someone can go to find out more information on medications and medical marijuana and maybe potentially interactions?
There's not really super definitive books on the interactions because the studies aren't great. So no one that I've seen has compiled something that any of us clinicians feel like that's the book we all use. There is no book we all use. I go on PubMed. That's very messy, but if I have a patient on a certain drug, I check any interaction with CBD or anything else I'm prescribing. You have to look it up one at a time. And oftentimes the research you might see will be, again, test tube or animal data. But every so often you'll get a human trial, and that gets exciting. So that goes with, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna follow up with another question actually regarding data about THC and glaucoma, if that's something you're familiar with, and any thoughts on.
I didn't familiarize myself with it enough because I didn't feel, since I'm not checking eye pressures in the office and there's so many glaucoma drugs, that the kind of person I'm going to see and certify for, I would want to check with her ophthalmologist. So I haven't even bothered to do the research on that very much, but that's like one of the early indications that it can lower eye pressures. And it can, it's just, like with all the conditions, there's a gazillion other drugs that will not get you high or stoned or, have you test positive on a drug test. So I kind of put that one to the side. I don't know of any ophthalmologists that will certify use cannabis unless they have that really, the patient has just, all the drugs have failed. And by the way, drugs fail patients. Patients don't fail drugs. I hate that term. We're trying to get rid of that. So when the drugs fail the patient, that's when you start to look for these alternatives.
And you brought up actually my next question regarding being drug tested. If you undergo pre-employment drug tests or a regular drug test for employment and you're using cannabis for medical use, how do you go about it with your employer, especially if you're not comfortable disclosing a medical history like a cancer diagnosis? Really tricky because the employer still has the right to terminate. They also can rescind an offer. And I've heard of that happening in the hospital system, 2 different hospital systems where they found out the patient was a medical cannabis patient and they did the drug testing was positive, offer rescinded regardless of the doctor's note I wrote. That was it. That's our policy. That's it. And they didn't want to set a precedent, so they can do that. You have to think the safety sensitive jobs like commercial truck drivers, forklift operators, airline pilots, train conductors, those not the ones who drive, train engineers, anything where you have many lives at stake and it's absolutely critical that the operator is sharp and not at all under any influence. Don't bother getting certified for cannabis because you can lose your job from that. So that's the part where if you're in an office job and you know that it's just not, I've had teachers, I've had nurses, I've had all kinds of folks get certified, and I'll have this talk with them. And if they're a driver, I say, let's not do that. And then we'll find other options. And for someone who maybe potentially is going to look for or is going to reduce or stop their usage in order to get employment, how long before applying for a job would it stay in your system? I was looking for that information. I've just heard the rule of thumb is a month, but I don't know where anyone has done. I didn't see research that said it's got to be a month. And I don't know that any of the tricks, are like taking certain things, flushes it out. Hard to know, but you definitely want to be off it for a while before you think, if you're on a job hunt and you have no idea. Now I've had patients say, I want to disclose, I want to be transparent, I don't have to worry about any of this. And I just say, what do you think their employer's like? Do they have a zero drug policy? What's the nature of your work? If you want, I can write you a letter. Other times people just try and just slip through HR and don't use it for a month if you can swing it. And back to the question on pain, sativa or indica is best for pain. What would you say? Probably the indica for the body pain, but for the depression and the mood, sativas can help. Now, hard to say, the person might do well on a hybrid and it's predominantly indica and some sativa. Again, hard to know what's that fine balance. So indica mostly for pain, sativa for mental. But that's, again, gross generalization. Thank you, Dr. Tempo. Last question here. Have you heard if you have to combine CBD with THC in order to activate the CBD? No. Or the person has heard that that's what the case is. Is that accurate? No, I don't think so. I've had patients who've been on hemp oil and they get a therapeutic effect. No THC in there. I think of THC as something that tamps down, or CBD tamps down the THC response. So the person may not get as off, flying out into outer space and such. But
or not be as stoned or high. But they don't activate. They can work well on their own. Also, I want to say something too about Delta 8 THC. You're going to be seeing things like that. I don't know if that's I think it is potentially psychoactive. So we have to be really careful. It's kind of like with kombuchas, and there's alcohol in it. So you'd hear the teenagers buying a bunch of kombucha so they could get drunk. This is one of those opportunities where Delta 8 THC is not regulated, so they can go buy it certain places and they can still probably get high. Just be wary that this is another wave that's going to be happening with the minor cannabinoids. CBN, CBG, I don't know enough about them to yet say anything definitive, but it's already here. It's already purchasable. So
do you have, speaking of purchasing, do you recommend people buying CBD at other locations or stick to dispensaries? And if you do you have suggestions on brands?
Okay, so CBD, if you're buying it remember, CBD from hemp, you can buy anywhere. So of course, I'm going to plug the NorthShore Wellness Shop because we've vetted all that stuff and we actually use what's in the shop on our patients. So that's where you're going to get good advice. For brands on Consumer Labs, I'll just highlight the ones I remember off the top of my head, the good brands. I'll put them in the chat because I know everyone's going to be scribbling furiously. I don't know if I can do in everyone. Panelists and attendees. Does that show up for everyone?
Yeah, panelists and attendees will show up.
Okay, so I've seen Charlotte's Web. The other one is CBD Plus by CV Sciences. Lixinol. Those are three. The Charlotte's Web and CBD Plus we use all the time. New Leaf is another one. The rest is like escaping my brain because I just haven't used them. Oh, I think no, I'm not gonna guess the name. Because if I'm wrong, that's really bad. So Consumer Lab is a $40 a year subscription. It's worth it alone just for the CBD updates that they do. But also they check fish oils and what are the good brands of turmeric and black cohosh. So that's a whole other world of herbs and supplements. What brands to get, they rate them. It's the only brand-oriented consumer database that I've seen to help you select the best brands. Or you see someone who knows, herbs and supplements really well, like me or one of my integrative partners, Geeta Maker-Clark, Pooja Saigal at NorthShore. There are growing numbers of us, but there's not enough of us because our wait times are really long, and we're trying to work on that. But I have residents and med students who come through, but it takes a while to learn all of this. Someone's asking, what was that company again? Which one?
Consumer Labs, maybe?
Oh, Consumer Labs, yes, consumerlabs.com, or it's consumerlab.com.
Consumer Lab, yeah.
That's a really good investment for 40, you can learn a lot. They don't just say which companies they rated. They even have the CBD for pets, like which ones they like for dogs, and cat, any of your furry children. Okay, what else? We're at 7:29 though, so I want to respect everybody.
We're perfect on time. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We always love having you, Dr. Temple. For everyone, as Dr. Temple mentioned, I will be sending you the slides. So you will receive that shortly with our evaluation. Please take a moment to complete that. Thank you so much for everyone's time, and Dr. Temple as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and take good care of yourself. Be well, be mindful, eat clean, move, and do a good job 80% of the time. Get a B. So for the rest of your life though.